Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for the Notes from the Field, a SAGE post-occupancy evaluation of Brio at Johnston. It's a SAGE webinar presented by Amy Carpenter and Mandy Kachur. Mandy, if I'm pronouncing your last name wrong, I apologize. At this point, I'd like to invite our presenters to introduce themselves. Amy?
Hi, I'm Amy Carpenter. I am an architect at SFCS out of their Philadelphia office, and I was the team leader for the SAGE POE.
And my name is Mandy Kachur, but that's okay. It's mutated Hungarian, so we actually mispronounce it too. And I am the principal consultant at Soundscape Engineering, and we are an architectural acoustics consulting firm out of Detroit, Michigan, and Chicago, Illinois.
Wonderful, thank you. My name is Jill Schrader, and I'm the SAGE Vice President, and I'm happy to be moderating this webinar. You see me frequently moderating a lot of our SAGE webinars, so I'm in it a lot. So for those of you not familiar with SAGE, we are the Society for the Advancement of Gerontological Environments. It's a membership-based organization representing and promoting collaboration between all disciplines of the senior living industry. And SAGE is pleased to present AIA-approved webinars every month. These webinars are free to SAGE members, so please visit sagefederation.org for information on SAGE membership. You'll be muted throughout this webinar session, and you will have the option to type in any questions by clicking on the Q&A button at the top of your screen. We will answer those at the conclusion of the session if time allows, but please keep your questions relevant to the topic that is being discussed. SAGE is an AIA-approved provider, and as this session will be about 90 minutes long, participants in this course are eligible for 1.5 AIA learning units. Please note that you must be registered for and logged into the webinar to receive AIA credit or a certificate of completion. SAGE will report credits earned by course attendees to AIA CES and will provide certificates of completion within 1 week if requested. However, if you did not enter your member number or request a certificate of completion when you registered, just email us at info@sagefederation.org. The information presented in today's presentation is protected under copyright. And at this point, I'm pleased to introduce Michael Peer with Clifton Larson Allen, who generously sponsored the 2022 SAGE POE. Michael.
Thank you, Jill. As Jill said, my name is Michael Peer. I'm a principal with CLA's healthcare practice. I'm based in Milwaukee. And once again, we're very honored to be one of the sponsors for POE for 2022. CLA works with providers across the country in the financing and development of campuses and campus expansions. I think that one of our interests in being a sponsor for the POE is really being able to look after occupancy and understand how these campuses worked and after that development phase and construction phase. I wanted to thank SAGE. We have a great relationship with SAGE and hope to continue that going forward. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael, for being a sponsor for us. And yes, we are all about education and spreading that throughout our industry. So take it away, Amy and Mandy. You're off.
All right, thank you. I'm just going to click through our learning objectives and session description, and let's get down to it. So thank you all for joining us. As Jill said, that this is all copyrighted material, so please do not use without prior permission. So let's get started with a little bit of an overview about SAGE. Hopefully all of you on the call already know SAGE and are all members. But SAGE obviously is a not-for-profit organization that focuses on education and improving the built environment for older adults. The key to SAGE is our multidisciplinary focus And we know that we are stronger by getting input from a wide variety of stakeholders in the industry. So post-occupancy evaluation, or POE, is a process of evaluating buildings in use. And there are 3 different levels of POE effort. This one is an indicative level POE. It's a 1-day walkthrough with interviews of staff and residents. And SAGE has been conducting post-occupancy evaluations since 1999, at least once per year. So our team this year, again, is a multidisciplinary team of stellar individuals. You've already met me. Majette Kaup is our research coordinator from Kansas State University. We have Lauren Tynes, who is an interior designer with Studio 65. Maggie Calkins is a gerontologist, a designer, and a researcher with Ideas Institute. Mandy Kachur, as you've already met, was our acoustician. We also had Chuck Childress from Buckner Retirement Services, and Jay Weingarten, who's also an architect with RDG. And we're really happy to have all of these talented individuals give their time to this process. This post-occupancy evaluation was conducted on March 7th. You can still see the snow on the ground. Seems as though it's snowed on us for the past few POEs. So I'm really excited that next year we're going to be going south for our post-occupancy evaluation. So stay tuned for more info on that. The first step in our process is to identify a site, and we typically target projects who have been recognized for excellence through the Environments for Aging Design Showcase. So in essence, they've already been peer reviewed. We look for projects that have a clearly stated programmatic, they state their program, their design goals, and hopefully some unique design features that we can see and then share with others who would like to know how these approaches work out. Excuse me. For the past 2 years, a supplemental white paper has been issued in addition to the regular follow-up webinars that are offered. And since we are making efforts to publish these materials, we're also committed to adhering to protocols that demonstrate that we are protecting the rights and interests of the individuals who contribute to our findings. We're hoping to release the white paper before the end of this year, so stay tuned for that as well, and it will be released on the SAGE Federation website. Because it's research, all of our team members have completed the federally mandated training through CITI for projects that use human subjects in research. Although interviews might seem like an innocent enough method, we all recognize that any resident or staff member who participates should understand that they are under no obligation to speak with us. And if they decide not to participate, that their relationship with their home or their organization won't be affected in any way. Throughout the day-long POE process, the POE team meets with a variety of stakeholders and users. Everyone is provided with a description of the POE visit at least 3 weeks prior to our arrival, and all individuals that we talk to sign an informed consent paper and agree to use their likeness in photos. So everybody you see in the presentation has given their permission for their photograph to be used and published. Another step in our protocols is to have specific targets that we are using to evaluate aspects of the environment. We use the SAGE principles as our guide here because these principles represent the attributes and outcomes that have been previously documented through research to be of value to users of an environment, specifically an environment that is focused on housing and services for older populations. And you can find our SAGE principles on the SAGE Federation website. Jill Schrader was not only our moderator today, but she was the interior designer in charge of this project. And Jill is the current vice president of SAGE. So let's get into the project a little bit. First, I'd like to thank Rob Kretzinger, the CEO of Wesley Life, and Teresa Kruger, who is the executive director at Brio. They welcomed us. We also want to thank Jill Schrader and Christine Soma from Pope Architects for being with us on the day of the POE. This project is in Johnston, Iowa, which is a suburb of Des Moines. The project required a middle market product strategy because Des Moines is a second tier market. And the site was chosen because it feels like it's really tucked into the existing neighborhood and it's close to the Main Street area of Johnston. Wesley Life really wanted to make the greater community feel welcome in the building, and several neighbors do also use the walking loop that's around the building. So the layout of the building, we have assisted living and independent living on one side. In the middle is commons. The blue is on the left is the independent living, and the purple represents the assisted living. And you can see how they're right up next to each other. Then on the right side of the plan are the skilled nursing households. Those are one-story household buildings with separate entrances from the outside. And the assisted living and independent living building is a 3-story building over a limited underground parking garage and service area. Because this was a middle market targeted project, the owner and design team intentionally reduced the amount of common space and made it as flexible as possible to serve multiple functions. The bistro seating can be used for additional dining. The lobby space is used often for activities, as well as the additional bistro seating. The club lounge has large barn doors on 2 sides of the room that can open it up to the other spaces, again, to allow for flexible gatherings. The one thing we heard from the residents is that they wished the community room was larger to accommodate more people. And we were wondering if possibly this could have been achieved by just opening up the wall between the club lounge and the community room with another set of barn doors or some kind of a movable partition. Something to be thought of next time. The memory care household, and this is a skilled nursing level memory care. Memory care household has 16 units, and the common space was really nicely divided up for sound and to create different experiences for the residents. There is a direct access from the outside in the parking lot that comes into the household, and you can see the red arrow at the bottom of the page there. And then the garage in brown on the right-hand side, that was intended to be used for transfers, people being brought in, new residents, or people being transferred in and out of the hospital. One of the interesting things that we heard was that the plan originally was to store garbage in the garage, but the smell got a little bit too much. So they added dumpsters outside the garage with screened enclosures. The second household also is skilled nursing level, and this is long-term care and short-term rehab. The peach or pinky color rooms on the right-hand side of the page are designated for short-term rehab. There's 7 units there. And then the yellow rooms were 13 rooms of long-term care. The common space here is a little bit more open. It still has the distinct door to the outside, as you can see with the red arrow. And the one thing I do want to point out, if you can see on the right-hand side of the page above the peach rooms or pinky rooms, is that there's a direct connection to the physical therapy space, which you see in the teal color. And this was an intentional lining up of the short-term rehab rooms right next to the rehab space. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So here's the typical floor plans for the assisted living and the independent living. Again, the assisted living is in the purple and the independent living is in blue. And they really wanted to put the rooms together in a way that there was really a blurring of the line and the distinction between independent living and assisted living. One of the interesting things to note on the floor plan, if you can see the red box on the third floor plan, is that there was a 2-bedroom unit there that was originally designated as an apartment that would be reserved for college students that would be perhaps doing an internship or working in the building. Unfortunately, there was a strong enough demand that they actually had to rent out that unit. So let's dive into the findings of the post-occupancy evaluation. There were 4 major themes that we discovered, and we could talk about so much more, but we're going to try to boil it down to just these themes. First is the modern farmhouse style. And the design team really aimed for this, and they said it was they were trying for a modern farmhouse style. And this all really starts at the front door. You could see there's field stone and the bright red or barn red vertical siding. The porte cochere is on the right-hand side, was detailed to look like a corn crib. And then, of course, there is in the center of the page, if you can see the corrugated metal silo. We really couldn't tell, like as a design team, we couldn't agree if we thought that the silo was kitsch or cool. So I don't know if you guys can give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down or on the webinar, but it'd be interesting to see what the group thinks, if it's kitsch or cool. We'll see. The space inside this silo, though, was really a nice room. It had a custom table created by Amish craftsmen. And interestingly, this space was likely the only truly private space, both visually and acoustically. All the rest were varying degrees of privacy because of the orientation and layouts. And the farmhouse theme continues once you get inside. This is the main lobby space. The exposed trusswork and columns and the high vaulted ceiling with the double slope really reminisces back to that farmhouse feeling. And if you look at the richness of the detailing with the echo of the corn crib detail around the front doors on the back wall of this photo, and then also look at the low cove lights around the reception desk on the left-hand side. All of this really belies this middle market or secondary market target of the community. And it's really amazing for the cost per square foot that they achieved. There's really an elegant simplicity to it, and it really hits the theme. One of the interesting side notes is because the property looks so nice and feels higher end, there was a lot of residents that moved in here that could have afforded a higher end property, but they moved in here because it was real bargain and it just looked so nice. But what they didn't understand was that this was a middle market property, and they started to expect some of the same level of amenities here at Brio that they would have gotten at a higher end community. There was one resident that complained that there was no free coffee. I guess they didn't understand why the common space was also so limited. And it's interesting that they didn't equate the affordable fees to less amenities. And the farmhouse theme continues in the rear courtyard. There's a shade structure that you see in the center there that again is reminiscent of a corn crib. And then you get the standing seam roofs, the field stone and the vertical siding, as well as that barn red siding. It just all really works together and reinforces the theme. What we couldn't figure out were there's a row of vertical fence posts in the middle of the garden, and we just couldn't figure out what they were for. But what we heard was that even in the dead of winter, the residents and the design team, they really wanted something to add interest and some kind of a vertical marking of the landscape when everything's covered in snow. And then the farmhouse details do continue throughout the use of decorative exposed wood beams through the corridors. We really liked the way that this added interest and helped break up the monotony of the long corridor. When we asked Jill, she said that this was actually a cheaper solution than to do a traditional drywall soffit. And it looks a lot nicer too. The theme continues on the right-hand side with barn doors inside the resident units. This happens to be an assisted living unit. And as an aside, I personally love the use of barn doors instead of swinging doors. I just think they're just easier to deal with. And when we asked the resident who lived in this unit who was using a wheelchair if she liked the barn door, she said, nah, it's fine. I don't mind either way. However, her husband, who is her caretaker, said that it made it so much easier to get her in and out of the rooms. The next thing we want to talk about is the integration of the care levels. And this is probably most intentional and most evident in the fitness area. The memory care household is to the top of the screen above the fitness area, and the short-term rehab and long-term care household is kind of to the bottom right of the screen. And while you can still enter those two households from the outside directly, if you're going to connect through to any of the other spaces or come from the independent living to visit somebody, you have to walk directly through this fitness area. And plus the physical therapy gym is on the bottom half of this area, and it shares some of the same space and equipment as the main fitness area that's used for independent living residents and assisted living residents. And then the doors to the long-term care and short-term rehab at the bottom of the page are always left open. They're not locked at all. Now, the design team had to work really hard with the regulators to allow this access through this space and not have it defined with, oh, this is a corridor, you have to have walls on both sides. And if you looked at, there's not even handrails along the corridor, which was really something unusual. The compromise that the design team had to make was that they had to delineate the corridor. The regulators wanted to see that there was a clear 8-foot distance. And you can see that they did this with a really subtle carpet color change. I mean, it's so subtle that you have to really look hard to find it. And then there's a soffit or, a ceiling level change to denote this 8-foot. But it's very successful. The design team also worked really hard on the lighting through the building, and they aim to have multiple light sources in all of the spaces. One of the cool features that I liked was, if you see here in the red box, it looked like just a regular 2x2 fixture. But it was actually a product that I hadn't seen before. Maybe you all have, but it's a solar tube type product that looks like a 2x2 fluorescent light fixture, but the optics in the lens really help spread the daylight throughout the space, and it amplifies the daylight. I thought this was a really clever way to bring natural light into the space. The fitness studio is perhaps where the most integration of the populations take place. The most popular class is the Rock Steady boxing class. And this class is specifically designed to help people with Parkinson's disease and to help the progression, to slow the progression of the disease. And a lot of people come in from the outside and they join independent living and assisted living residents for the class. So the apartment building was designed specifically to co-locate the assisted living and the independent living residents together. Yes, they're separated by wings. And again, the purple is the AL and the blue is the IL. But they share the same elevator core, which is in the lower right. Let me see if I can actually get my cursor to work. Hopefully you can see this. But the elevator core is in the lower right corner, and then the staircases are at the very ends of the corridors. There's 2 staircases there. And then here's what the corridors look like. One of them is IL and one of them is AL. And do you see a difference between the corridors? I mean, honestly, I can't even remember which one is which at this point, and I took the photos. But it's good. It's a good thing that, there's no difference in the quality and the appointments between the 2 different care levels. But I can't help but wish there was a little more differentiation to help with wayfinding. There's the door insets, if you can see on the picture on the right, the door insets are all have there's three different colors that rotate throughout all the door insets throughout the whole building. And I'm wondering if maybe even just changing the three colors in the AL from the three colors in the IL might have helped a little bit. Oh, one other interesting point is that the residents said that because there's no stair tower near the elevators, that I guess they wish that they had a stair tower right next to the elevator so that they had that easy option to either take the stair or to take the elevators. They said that the elevators sometimes are slow because they're used for moving in and other things, and they would have gladly bypassed the elevator to take the stairs if they were able. But because the stairs are too far away, it's not worth it. So they wait for the elevator. Something to think about. Independent living and assisted living residents eat together in the dining room. There are different areas of the room with different atmospheres, but according to the residents, some areas are noisier and some are quieter, and Mandy's going to tell you more about that in a minute. But folks kind of self-select where they sit based on their abilities. And the assisted living residents, they get 3 meals a day, whereas the independent living residents, I think they either get 1 meal or they can choose when they come. But there's no segregation by care levels. We also asked if the nursing home residents were allowed to come out and use this dining area. The residents clearly said yes, they're absolutely welcomed, and it's part of the marketing that we agreed to when we came into the community, that we're all in this together, and anybody is welcome anywhere in the building. In reality, though, what we heard was that few nursing home residents do come out and use this dining room, primarily because they have to be escorted and specifically brought out to be able to use it. Teresa, though, the executive director of Brio, noted that they do work really hard to minimize that transition between care levels as much as possible. She said that there was one AL resident that had to move to skilled nursing, and she really wanted to keep her nursing, her emergency call system, like it's a watch that they use. And instead of telling her, no, you can't do that, you have to go to whatever the system is that the nursing uses, the Brio staff worked with the nurse call provider to make it work the way that it needed to for those increased needs. So I'm going to turn things over to Mandy now to talk to you some of the acoustical details of the building. And this image is the POE team blowing up balloons so that Mandy could use them in her sound testing. And we had fun with that. Mandy?
And I certainly appreciated the help because I didn't want to blow up 75 balloons by myself. So the project, as you heard, also emphasized acoustics. And I want to talk a little bit about why that's so important for senior living facilities. And the hearing ability among seniors falls off as people get older. And it makes it more difficult to hear in noisy environments. Now, while this process typically starts in your 40s, it becomes more pronounced as you're getting older. And so these communities really need to pay attention to acoustics, and designers should keep in mind that our hearing experience isn't necessarily what somebody else's hearing experience is. And so we need to be sensitive to designing for people with special needs for hearing. Now, some of these people could use hearing aids, but only about 30% of people who probably ought to be using hearing aids actually do. But there's also other problems with hearing aids, in that if you don't have the top of the line models, they often amplify all sounds and they're not directional. So that they take in the sounds from everywhere around your head instead of just focusing on the sounds in front of you. Our hearing is quite directional. But the microphones in the hearing aids tend to, some models tend to be problematic there. And so what ends up happening is, instead of amplifying the voice of the person that you're talking to, it amplifies the background sound in the room as well as the voice, and it kind of mixes them all together. You don't have quite the directionality capabilities. And so this reduced ability here to hear the speech in a room full of noise becomes a quality of life issue for the residents. It can limit their enjoyment of being in group situations. Communication, of course, if you're not able to hear what the other person is saying, you can't answer their questions or converse with them. And this all ends up reducing their well-being and increases the social isolation for these people. And so noise also increases stress in people. It can have negative physiological and psychological health outcomes. Things like, studies have shown that it increases blood pressure, can have a quicker respiratory rate, loneliness when you can't hear what people are saying becomes more pronounced. If look on the right, there's a graph just showing that as age progresses, the incidence of these problems becomes more, grows in the population. So the inspiration on this particular project came from another facility where SAGE had done a post-occupancy evaluation study in 2014 at Hearthstone, which is in Pella, Iowa. And the outcome of that informed the acoustics design at the Brio of Johnston. And the acoustics, I was able to get into the Hearthstone facility also while I was in Iowa for the POE, and we're going to be able to compare some data to see the improvements that Brio made over Hearthstone. And my life's work is doing acoustics, making environments better for people. And so thankful that Wesley Life and others have become more aware in recent years that acoustics is very important to people in the room. It's not just something, call up the acoustics consultant when you've got a concert hall to design. We work on all kinds of spaces, and senior living facilities, I think, are one of the most important spaces that we do work on. So Wesley Life and Pope Architects both had this importance in mind when they designed Brio and invested in incorporating acoustical materials and the like into making this environment better for the occupants. And I say here compassionately, because really, again, this is a quality of life issue for the residents, and having empathy for somebody who can't hear as well as, say, you do, you need to, again, keep this foremost in your mind when designing the facilities. We have 5 senses, and while most people probably rely on sight the most, and architects may tend to emphasize that quality because that's who they are. We want to see a beautiful space, and of course it needs to function well. But acoustics is also a very big part of making sure that the space functions well. So let's take first look at the something that maybe people think of most often when they think of acoustics, and that's reverberation, which is the length of time that sound lingers in a space. So a longer reverberation time, the sound lingers longer, and a shorter reverberation time, it's the sound dies away quicker. And in spaces with shorter reverberation time, speech intelligibility is better because you don't get this background sound kind of lingering in the air. And To compare the two facilities, Brio is there on the left. What was incorporated were acoustical materials. And there's a very subtle, in this picture, it's almost impossible to tell that there's acoustical treatment on the ceiling because it's not your standard acoustical tile ceiling. It's a called a stipple painted fiberglass panel, which it has very much the appearance of gypsum board. And these panels were butted together and surface mounted to the gypsum board on the ceiling of, this is the dining area in skilled nursing. Whereas on the right, the Hearthstone facility did not incorporate this material. And on the next page, we can see that this resulted in a longer reverberation time. The graph on the right, reverberation time gets greater as the axis goes up. And then we break it down, we being acoustical consultants, break it down by frequency, because certain bands are more important to speech than others. And but you can see that over the entire range from 250 hertz up to 4,000 hertz, the voice range, that this covers pretty much the entire voice range, that at least the importance part, but the most important for enunciation and speech intelligibility is the 500 and the 1,000 hertz bands. But the incorporation of those acoustical panels reduced the reverberation 10%. That's probably on the border of a noticeable difference, but I think it is noticeable, and it's noticeable for the occupants in this space. So the goal, the FGI, that refers to the Facility Guidelines Institute's guidelines for healthcare facilities, and in this case, the residential volume. So the goal was to achieve the FGI guidelines and environment also that sounds residential. Pope architects emphasized that they wanted their space to sound residential. And that's difficult to do when you think about it, because you have much larger spaces in these facilities than you do in your home. And they achieve that by incorporating these acoustical materials. One other, in the memory care area, they also divided the spaces into smaller rooms. And there are two things that dictate the reverberation time. That's not only the amount of acoustical material that you have in a room, but also the room volume. So when a room gets larger, the reverberation time will go up. So smaller divided spaces is helpful for the reverberation, and also for isolating, maybe reducing the activity level as far as the busyness feel of the area for those folks over in the memory care. But also in the regular skilled long-term skilled nursing, they had this treatment also. So, I'm sorry, Amy, can you just flip back just a moment there? Yeah, I want to mention the budget needs, because often acoustics gets thrifted out of projects. It's an easy thing to cut. I'm an advocate, of course, for not doing that. Some people might accuse me of having a little bit of blinders on, but again, as a consultant, we try to present our owners and clients with the knowledge, the options of, well, if you do thrift this out, these are the things that might result. People might have more difficulty hearing. They might not want to come down to dinner. We were at a different facility doing a post-occupancy evaluation, and there were people that said they just don't even bother coming down to dinner because it wasn't worth it. The struggle wasn't worth it for them. So I really ask that people consider these consequences when thrifting acoustical materials out of projects. Okay. And In the assisted and independent living dining area, this is an interesting situation for me in particular, because usually spaces that are open to each other, you can see in the image on the right, this is there were two areas essentially divided by this large bulkhead, low ceiling area in between. And normally the spaces that are open to each other would have the same reverberation time. However, this large bulkhead and the distance between the two spaces in that low ceiling area actually made it such that there were different room characteristics between the two. The larger space, the two-story space there on the left, had acoustical wall panels, but a gypsum board ceiling. There was carpet in both of the spaces on either side of that low ceiling area. On the right, the vaulted ceiling area had wood ceiling, but no wall panels in that space. Now, the inspiration again for the acoustic materials were based on this dining room down at Hearthstone, the independent dining room there, assisted living space. And that one was all hard surfaces. There were no carpet, hard walls, no panels, and the ceiling was gypsum board. And here was the result. Again, we've got a reverberation time graph on the left. The target range is the highlighted gray area. This would be the ideal range for the size of room and the function of the room. The Hearthstone is shown in green, which is the top line there with the longest reverberation time. And the difference you can see between the two-story space at Brio and the vaulted wood ceiling area at Brio was actually a 16% difference. Now, while none of them completely fall within the target range, the difference, that 26% reduction between the Hearthstone dining and the Brio vaulted area was very, very noticeable. And even that 12% reduction was noticeable between Hearthstone and Brio. So that there was definitely an improvement by the introduction of the acoustic materials. The FGI guidelines for dining facilities has numbers that as far as the area of the seating density, and that has to do with the number of people that you're cramming into a space or giving enough breathing room in a space to dissipate the sound. That's typically, in these types of facilities, that's typically achieved just because of the room needed for, say, maneuverability and getting wheelchairs to tables and walkers and the like. The number that's more difficult to achieve, though, is the amount of absorptive materials per resident. And in both of these spaces, that really wasn't quite achieved. One of the problems is that carpet is not as efficient an absorber as a 1-inch thick panel or acoustical ceiling tiles. And so getting enough absorption per person is more difficult. But some material is clearly better than ignoring and not including materials at all. And that's evidenced by the comparison of these two facilities. So as Amy mentioned before, the unique thing here is that because there are two separate spaces that are still visually connected, the residents have tended to self-select. They told us the people who have more trouble hearing go to the vaulted ceiling area, and the people who don't have as much difficulty will go to, and they're able to eat in that two-story space. And so this 16% reduction in reverberation is apparent, and it's the residents can sense this, and it does hold down the background sound level, and so they move to the space that has the reduced reverberation time. So my thoughts are that if all of this, if the space, if there's not enough budget to treat the entire space or the entire dining room, maybe make a space that's quieter, that's off to the side, that has less reverberation, more absorptive surfaces, so that the people can go there that aren't able to hear as well. And that way they're not forced to be in a larger space that's more reverberant. Okay. We also looked a bit at the sound isolation. Now, we weren't able to look at the sound isolation between resident rooms because the sound isolation test is a lot more disruptive than the reverberation test. You have to use super loud noise and loudspeakers and all that. But after hours, when the community areas were vacated, I went back and did some testing for sound isolation. The goal that Pope had and Wesley Life in these spaces were to acoustically connect them so that once you're shut into a room that you don't feel completely isolated. And their goal was achieved by the design. And so I'd like to introduce another thought, though, that maybe when you can hear adjacent spaces, that it might be distracting to say the meeting. You might not be able to concentrate as well in what's going on in the space that you're in. So this is going to be a trade-off that people need to decide between it when in the design phase, what exactly you're trying to accomplish. Well, among acoustics consultants, barn doors are notorious for not isolating very well. And you can see that by the results here. NIC is a noise insulation or isolation class. It's similar to STC, which is sound transmission class. It's site specific, it's room specific. I won't get into the nuances there, but it's more or less the same thing. And so you can generally compare the two. They're usually a couple points off from each other. And so in NIC 17 and NIC 20 that we see through those barn doors at the club lounge is very low. That's that would be typical for a barn door that's not sealed, which are pretty much impossible to seal anyway. Swing doors typically are better. If you have a full seal around the perimeter, you can get an NIC maybe in the high 20s or low 30s. And so again, it's a trade-off of functionality, look, the appearance, and acoustics. In the community room, there was a different issue there. And for aesthetics, the gap between the glazing there was not sealed, because everybody knows that opaque caulk is kind of ugly. But what that does is that gap allows sound to transfer across that partition. And that wall tested at NIC 16. If those were sealed, we'd probably expect that to jump by at least 10 points, maybe a bit more, depends on how heavy the glass is. But again, this it's a design decision. We did have some people mention that there were right below or like across the hallway from that glass wall are restrooms. And so if somebody needs to leave the meeting to use the restroom, they would hear the flushing toilets. They'd see the people walking in and out. So The acoustic and the visual privacy wasn't quite there for those folks. I don't know if that was a big problem, but it was mentioned by the residents. So, and having said all this about this performance, being not quite what we might recommend typically as an acoustics consultant, there wasn't really any complaint about it. That there was the one mention of the restrooms, but I think that was more of a visual complaint than an acoustic complaint. The way to improve this would be, again, to seal up the wall, use maybe something, materials with higher STC, and swing doors can be sealed better, and therefore they can be, they would improve the sound isolation. But again, these are all decisions that need to be made in the design stage. Okay, next slide, please. And the last acoustic aspect that we looked at in the facility was HVAC background sound levels. We had a couple residents mention that the, I think it was, there were heat pumps in their rooms were loud. And this, one resident in particular was concerned about the heat pump that was in the mechanical closet was in her bedroom. And when the unit turned on, it was very loud and it would disturb her sleep. And what we've got here on the left now is a different type of graph. We've got sound pressure level, so how loud something is on the y-axis, the vertical axis, and then again frequency on the horizontal axis. And the background sound level that was measured in the resident rooms, this ambient, that's without the unit operating, is the dotted purple line at the bottom there, which is below, if you're familiar with the term NC or noise criterion. It's a set of, it's a family of curves that ASHRAE uses to describe a sound spectrum of HVAC noise. This is NC20, which is wonderful for a quiet residence, but bad if you can hear things going on in other spaces. You would be disturbed if something starts up, say like your HVAC unit. And while it's typical, you would expect that once the unit turns on and the fan turns on, or the compressors, that you would expect to hear some sound. But in this particular case, you can see that the sound level increases, especially for cooling, but even in the heating mode at the 125 hertz frequency, which is typically a fan frequency, increases over 20 decibels. That's over 4 times as loud as that background sound level. So with having that unit in her room, or even in the living room, and you're watching TV and it turns on, it's quite a bit louder than the background. And when you get that much louder, it can be disruptive. So the way to solve this would be, first and foremost, to buy quiet units and try to not locate them in the occupied spaces. They kind of have them off to the side or in the back in a utility area if possible. I know that's difficult for these apartments, but especially keep them out of the bedrooms. Okay, next slide. And again, another NC chart here on the left. And this time we evaluated the conference rooms, the meeting rooms, and the HVAC levels were high in the target range. I've got three ranges shown. The dashed black line is the FGI maximum recommended levels. The ASHRAE, the upper range of what they would recommend for these types of spaces, is shown in yellow, and then the range in green there is maybe some of the quieter range that ASHRAE would recommend for these spaces. And in all cases, the HVAC noise in the meeting rooms were too loud. And again, if you have hearing impairments, it's especially problematic to have that really high background sound levels when you're trying to listen to a presenter or somebody talking. So the fix for the more community spaces, again, buying quieter units, but you can also do acoustical lining in the ductwork or duct silencers, lower the air velocity, and that includes quieter diffuser and grill selections. So when you get too high air velocity across those grills, they can contribute a lot of hissy type of sound. And so that's something the HVAC noise really shouldn't be overlooked. And in this particular facility, I would say that more attention probably needed to be paid to that, so that the next time this can be a lessons learned taken from this facility and applied to the next one. And in the meantime, hopefully the manufacturers will design quieter units. They're needing to, because there's pressure for schools to have quieter units, again, for the very same reason, so that children can hear. And so the manufacturers in, I'd say, the last 10 or 15 years have been striving to make quieter units. Okay, and that concludes the acoustics section.
Thank you, Mandy. That was awesome. All right. So the last theme that we want to touch on is some of the household features specifically. Again, the memory care household was 16 units, and it really had some very nice features that we want to highlight. The intent, the original design intent, and again, remember that they wanted to have everybody kind of go through that fitness area, which you see in the kind of the blue teal type color. The intent was really just to have one single width man door where you see the red arrow. But of course, you know, we had to, the design team had to work with the regulators, and the regulators mandated that they had to maintain the corridor, which means that you had to have cross corridor doors, the big wide dual acting doors that you see. So they placed those just to the south of that regular man door. But on the inside, if I can get my cursor to work, you see those doors, the single width man doors on the right in the white, and then the cross corridor doors. They did a really good job of disguising those doors with the mural that they applied to the door. The lighting is lower, so it distracts from the door, and the oil rub bronze for the push bar, the panic bar, really helps it disappear into the mural. As a result, Teresa, the executive director, said that they really don't have a big problem with exit-seeking behavior. And I think that part of it is because that there's so many other interesting things to look at and to do. One really interesting aside note is that if you see in the plan on the right-hand side that there's a little wall to the north of the red arrow for the office. And on that wall is where the community has all their required postings, and they're really well done with, you know, nice frames and everything. But they can't figure out, there's a picture of the ombudsman posted on that wall or hanging on that wall, and that picture routinely disappears, and they don't know why. But at least the picture of the ombudsman is distracting from the use of that door. The main door that leads to the outside is also cleverly disguised. If you could see in the plan on the right-hand side, it's kind of tucked around the corner, and then see how the ceiling level is brought down, the lighting level is lower, and all of that discourages residents from going in that little nook. And then if they do go in that nook, excuse me, There's an old-fashioned typewriter there and some interesting things hanging on the walls that will distract them and give them an activity to do and distract from the door itself. Now, the door itself is also treated with a mural that disguises the door and the hardware. And this was so successful that during the initial open house, when they had the board members walk through, the board couldn't figure out how to get out of the building. And they said, "You've done a really good job here." The owner and the design team also wanted the weighing process to be a better experience and not an afterthought. Getting a resident's weight is one of the first things you do when they're checking in or when they're, coming to the community for the first time. And it's always a stressful time. And a lot of times the scale is, buried in a tub room somewhere or just randomly placed elsewhere in the building. And this group, the design team and the owner, they really wanted to make it a special experience. So they created a special room that you see highlighted in the red box, and they built the scale into the floor so that it's just, you're just walking across the floor, it's not as obvious, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And the room felt nice. It had a nice window to the outside to bring in natural light, and it had a glass door leading to the corridor. One of the problems that they discovered, though, is that because the glass door was on axis with the main corridor, you can see it in the plan on the right-hand side that it was, directly in the view. And then the window beyond was directly in view of that glass door. The residents thought that was the access to get outside, that maybe it was leading to a porch or something. And they were getting really agitated and desperately trying to get out that door because they thought that was how you got outside. I'm not sure exactly who came up with the solution, but the solution they came up with was that they just applied a simple film to that glass door. And it was enough that you still get light coming through. It's still a nice experience, but because you didn't have that clear sight, it greatly reduced the amount of residents that were trying to go out through that door. So simple solutions sometimes really work. Speaking of other distractions, this is Jack. Jack was very outgoing, and he decided that he was going to follow us around the whole time that we were in the memory care household. Jack also really enjoys playing with the lights and the fiber optic lights in the snooze-in room. And we spent a little bit of time torturing Jack with those lights, and he couldn't quite get them. And then this is Jill. Jill is Jack's sister, and Jill's a little more laid back, but as cats will do, she found a nice cozy box to sit in. Around the household and the corridors, there's little themed vignettes as you walk around the hallway area. And each grouping of artwork is different, and there's a very nice variety of visual and tactile objects. For example, in the center of this photo, there's a basket with hooks at the bottom, and in there are dried corn stalks or corn ears with the, I guess I don't know what you call it, the leaves that wrap around it. Teresa said that a lot of times, like the staff were getting upset because the residents were taking the corn cobs out of this basket and they were walking around with it, and the staff were saying, "Oh my gosh, they're destroying the artwork." And Teresa's like, "No, that's okay. That's what they're meant to do. Just let them do it." And so the staff have now figured out that it's okay. They just go around and they find these corn cobs in random places and they just put them back in the basket when they find it. I think that all of us as designers, we need to remember that this is the resident's home. It's okay for them to move things around, but that means that they're engaged and they're interested and they're making it their own. Some of the little vignettes that they have audio art, like this cow that you see on the bottom. I'm going to see if I can play this. I don't know if it's going to translate well, but I'm going to give it a shot. Well, There we go. I don't know if you can really hear that, but it does moo. It makes noise, and I love cows. So I, of course, had to take a picture of this. But they also had some that were, there was one that was like an old jukebox and it played 50s music. There was one that was a car that had like the engine revving. It was an interesting, compilation of things, and it kind of went with the theme of the rest of the vignette. I thought it was very well done. And then there's also other things to do, like this potting station that you see on the left-hand side. You were able to still do gardening activities, even though there was snow on the ground outside and people didn't really want to be out there. And then there was also the tactile art that you see on the right-hand side. Teresa mentioned that she often sees family members as they're walking down the hall will reach out their hand and just touch the panels as they pass by. And of course, the residents are doing that as well, but it's just a natural instinct. And it's kind of fun to interact with your surroundings in different ways. But overall, we thought that the vignettes and the artwork in the memory care were extremely well done, and some of the best that we've seen in a while. The bistro space in the memory care household was also really fun, and it provides a different experience. We really loved the string lights above the seating area and the natural light that was coming into this area in a kind of controlled way. The staff did report that there were resident difficulties with the flooring transition here. And we couldn't pinpoint the issue exactly, and we didn't observe anybody pausing here. People seemed to cross over without a problem. But I mean, the color contrast between the hard flooring and the carpet wasn't too much, but there is a change there. I mean, definitely a material change. If anything, maybe the transition strip was a little too contrasty, and it did have a sharp bevel on it. We don't know, maybe it was that angle that kind of comes in at an awkward place where you're coming out of the doors. Maybe that could have been flipped the other way and it would have had a different impact. We're not really sure. That's something that could be studied further to learn a little bit more about. But things that, to keep in mind, try to make your transitions as flush and as, less contrast as possible. Okay, so wrapping up, in summary, first, we really want to commend the designers and the owners for taking the lessons learned from Hearthstone, the previous project, and conscientiously applying them to this project, and trying to improve the environment, specifically the auditory or acoustical environment. And, all projects are living labs, and we need to take the things that we learn from them and continually improve our work. The design team also delivered a lot of wow factor for a really modest budget. If you remember, I forgot to point it out, but it was $146 a square foot. And in today's dollars, that's completely unheard of. But, we can learn from the lessons here that reducing the amount of common space, making what common space you do have as flexible as possible, and then adding design impact in key areas. If you think about it, like this design, it really, it's really just simple pops of color with paint and artwork that really is doing a lot of the work, and adding that interest and just richness in key areas. Next, don't be afraid to integrate care levels. Yes, you do have to work harder with the regulators to make it happen, but there can be a lot of benefits for everybody and all involved. And then lastly, of course, acoustics are something that we as designers really don't pay enough attention to, and when it can really make a huge difference. And when the details are done well, It's a beautiful thing. Too much noise, whether it's from the equipment, the HVAC equipment, or reverberation, is an environmental stressor, and it can really negatively impact our well-being. Mandy, do you have any last thoughts about the acoustics that you want to chime in on?
No, that covers it. I, of course, always appreciate people paying attention to acoustics because it really does affect quality of life.
Mhm. Okay, there's two more details that we wanted to leave you with, and both of these are bathroom related. Yes, I am the weirdo that takes pictures in bathrooms, but I promise I don't get people in them. But first, this public restroom on the right-hand side only had recessed can lights over the main hallway area, which made the two stalls on the right-hand side ridiculously dark. A better lighting solution that spread the light more evenly, maybe do like more of a indirect light, or adding lights over each stalls would have helped tremendously. So just keep in mind that these recessed can lights are really bad at general illumination. And the next detail, now you know that a toilet, the center of the toilet is going to be located 18 inches off the side wall. So please, please, please plan for this tile accent to be centered on the toilet. Now, granted, it was very likely that the design team actually had this right, and the contractor just was trying to cut corners and do a whole tile instead of having to cut a tile. But this kind of thing just drives me crazy. And by the way, you see that the flush handle is also located on the wrong side of the toilet tank, and that's something that needs to be on the wide side always. So don't forget that. So this is going to conclude our AIA continuing education course, and we will open it up for questions. But I wanted to again thank Jill Schrader and Wesley Life for allowing us to conduct the POE of Brio, and keep an eye on the SAGE website for the white paper that's going to go into a lot more detail and have more photos. And we really do, we're trying very hard to have it available before the end of the year.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Amy and Mandy. This does conclude the AIA CES, as you just said, Amy, portion of the course, and we're not done yet. We do have a few minutes to go through any questions that you may have, as Amy suggested, so please type them in to the Q&A at the bottom of the screen, and we will address them right now. Usually the first question that we always see, and I don't see it yet, but it'll happen, is do we get can we get a copy of this presentation? Usually everyone wants to know that. And Amy, could you address that?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want a copy of the presentation, just email info@sagefederation.org, and we will send you a PDF copy. And of course, the recording of the webinar will be posted on the sagefederation.org website.
And actually, this is Lori with SAGE, and I'll just chime in and say that everyone who registered for the webinar will get an email with a link to the webinar recording, as well as a link to the webinar presentation, a PDF of that. So you don't need to email us, you will automatically get it.
There you go. Thank you, Lori.
All right, first question that we see was where is this located? And I did respond to that, but if anyone had questions, it was in Johnston, Iowa, a suburb, as Amy had said, of Des Moines, Iowa. I'm going to go to another question. Sorry if I missed it, but what does FGI stand for?
Yeah, that's the Facilities Guidelines Institute, and they are the caretaker of the documents that guide hospitals, outpatient, and residential healthcare facilities.
Okay. Shauna, if you're still on, that was your question. That was your answer. Carrie has a question. What is the name of the 2x2 light you showed?
Oh gosh, Jill, can you answer that?
What photo would that be off of? And let me see if I remember it.
It was in the fitness center. It was like a solar tube. That
it's called the solar tube. It's called the Sola tube. I don't think it has an R in it. Sola tube, and it does have the refractor lenses that come down. So the tube itself can bend around and go all the full height up to the top of the roof, and then it just bends the light all the way down and amplifies it as it enters the room. So Sola tube. I could probably send an
Excellent.
email afterwards.
Yeah, that was a really cool light. I mean, that
Good.
brought in the daylight in such a nice way, controlled way, and
Good.
kudos.
You know, I'm in an unusual position here, being the moderator, and that you guys are writing the white paper on a community that I worked on, or that we worked on. So as you're stating your facts and I'm hearing this, I'm just like, great information. And yes, thank you so much for all this study, because a lot of times, and I think I'm speaking for a lot of, it might be in a question already, but most of the time we do not have money in any budget to hire an acoustician, but it's so worth it. Mandy, look at your data that you're bringing forward. Even the study of this, the post-occupancy evaluation, it's just invaluable. It's so helpful in our communication tools and what we do in what communities, and what that means for quality of life for each resident. So I know, Lori, I know I'm not talking like moderator right now. So, okay, back to the question. Rudy has a question. How does the modern farmhouse style impact those living with dementia? Does it provide familiarity or confusion for them? And in my opinion, that would determine whether it's a cool kitsch or not a cool kitsch.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I would think it would be familiar for the residents, especially if they grew up in, or they lived most of their life in this area surrounding, because there was a lot of details that were pulled from the surrounding area, at least that I was able to observe. I'm not from Iowa, so I'm not entirely sure, but I wouldn't think that the modern twist on the farmhouse style would confuse people. I think it looked great.
Yeah, and I can speak on behalf of Wesley Life in looking at the market study and looking at the residents who lived in this community and the families coming from this area. This is exactly what they were looking for, to relate to where they're living today, where they grew up, etc., and that relationship to the farming community. It's on the outskirts of Des Moines. Fred has a question, and of course Fred's question, this is Fred Worley, is about fire rating. Was the tube easy to include a fire rated ceiling roof assembly? I'm not sure that the team for the post-occupancy evaluation would know the answer to that.
Yeah, I would guess, Fred, that that was not a rated roof ceiling assembly. It was only a one-story building, but I would think that you could box out around it if you really had to. I think that the juice is worth the squeeze. If you had to box out around it, that you would, getting that daylight in, if there was no other way to do it, that to me would be definitely worth it. Good question, though.
Very good question, Fred. Let's see, another question. Shauna asks, were any other indoor environmental quality parameters measured, such as indoor air quality?
Not during this POE, no. In fact, the Mandy really stepped up the POE process. I mean, this was just an indicative level, which is really the most shallow level of POE that you can do. I mean, you could definitely get more involved, but Mandy really took it to a higher level by her specific sound testing, and we thank her so much for being willing to do that.
Yeah, I'm an engineer. I just need data. In order to talk about something, I have to have numbers.
We love that data. There hasn't been a question raised on this yet, but Mandy, as you addressed, just speaking from the design team coming from working on this project, Mandy, you had brought up that unit used in the apartment, and that it did not meet the level of the acoustics that you would expect, or that it needs to meet. And without having an acoustician to measure that before that decision is made it a risk. And I think we looked back on shop drawings, if I'm not mistaken, and that unit, the mechanical system, was a value engineering decision. So it was not the original specification, if I recall. Do you recall that, Mandy, or?
Yeah, actually, I'm not aware of any design or like substitutions, and that very well could be, because that frequently happens. And so what I would recommend is that the specification has a maximum sound level allowable in there, so that when you have to bid out to 3 different manufacturers, that you're not getting a noisier unit, because usually the cheaper units are noisier.
Yeah.
But hopefully, again, the competition amongst the manufacturers will help to drive those numbers down. They're better than they used to be. I will say that.
Absolutely. And I do also have to comment too, again, on another point that you brought up, Amy, coming from the design team, of the questionable flooring treatment that was causing an issue of the fall risk hazards in the bistro area in the memory care space. That is another example of where our AHJ had really wanted to see a definition between the boundary of the corridor versus the boundary of the common space. So the original intention was to bring that hard surface flooring all the way out. So as you stepped out of the dining room, you felt as though you were going out in an outdoor space. So with the hard surface stone-like floor and the baffles above, but we had to define the corridor so it follows the path of the corridor, kind of thing. So
There's always something.
exactly, there is a reason for everything, and I love post-occupancy evaluations for this very reason of seeing it from a new set of eyes and really studying the why was it successful, how can we all improve on moving forward and really serving our seniors and doing the right thing, because we all love and we're so passionate about what we do. I don't see any other questions, so I do want to thank all of you for joining us today, and thank you, Amy and Mandy, for sharing such valuable information.
Jill, if I can interrupt, I do
Yes.
see one other question from Ed asking what low vision design parameters were involved.
Good catch, it just came. Thank you, Lori.
Jill, you might be able to answer that, because we can't for what you designed to. We didn't notice any other, like there were no other transitions that were raised as a problem, or we didn't notice anything that stood out in that regard. I don't know if there were anything that you as a design team specifically designed towards, if you had any specific goals in that regard.
What low vision design parameters? Let me just think. Well, you've mentioned from the I think one of your first slides that we did pay close attention to introducing many different light sources. As we've learned over and over again, we need to have a horizon light, an overhead light, different lights from all sides of the room and evenly spread out so that we don't have any dark holes. I can't answer if you guys noticed that, like you said, studied it while you were there as the post-occupancy evaluation, because of course I'm going to say, I feel we did a really good job, but of course I'm going to say that. No.
Except for that toilet room, that public toilet room was bad, but no.
I didn't even realize that until you showed that photo. So I'm like, brilliant. Yes, we need to improve on that. Low vision, let's see. If we think of it later, we can send it in an email, but boy, we certainly do pay attention as we're running through our strategy to have that fall risk. It's so important to us. Ed, I'm so sorry. I can't think of other examples of how we address this. And design team members, if you're on, please type it in if you're thinking of it. And just in this little bit of time, we see more questions. Yay. All right, here I was closing, and here I'm going to ask more questions. All right, Shauna has another question. For the memory care area, did you interview family members on behalf of the residents?
Yeah, we do typically ask for family members to interview them on behalf of the residents. In this particular group, we did not have, to my knowledge, I don't think we had any family members for the memory care residents. We did have staff, like some of the frontline staff for the skilled care area as well as the memory care, but and we had a lot of assisted living and independent living residents, but I don't believe that we actually had anybody from memory care for this time. And it's, we can't force people to talk to us.
All right, Fred has another question. It was great to see good examples of disguising doors allowed in later editions of the LSC.
That's the life safety code. And yes, I totally agree with you, Fred. These were great examples and really well done disguising of doors. And yay, progress with the life safety code.
Exactly. Ed wanted to add wall versus floor versus ceiling when looking for low vision design parameters. We're always making a case throughout. I think you can see it in the images of very clear base along the floor. Sometimes in communities, we see a carpet base following along carpeted areas. I believe we continue to have wood base or a wood look base so that we see a clear definition from the wall vertical surface to the floor. Ceiling differences, we tried to mask. This was an effort by Wesley Life Corporate that all ceiling finishes look as close to something that you would have in a home as possible. So not necessarily low vision, but trying to emulate a gyp ceiling or a wood ceiling as closely as possible so you do not even notice that we have treated it with acoustic treatments. I know that's not low vision, Ed, what your question was, but it is talking about a ceiling finish. And then you have another comment here, NIBS has low vision design guidelines, National Institute of Building Sciences.
Yep. I mean, again, that's something that we do typically look for, especially, contrast in the same plane versus contrast in adjacent planes. We do try to pay attention to that when we're doing our post-occupancy evaluations, and we didn't notice anything that was not really done well. So usually we'll point that out. So thankfully, this community did a good job there.
Good. Wonderful. I don't see any other questions, so I am going to wrap it up. And again, thank you once again, Amy and Mandy. And thank you, Michael, for being the sponsor too and joining us on this panel here. There is a reminder that at all the webinar registrants will receive a link to the recording of today's session via email within a few business days. And on behalf of SAGE, thank you for joining us. We'll see you again soon.